Hello, my friends. Thank you for joining me today at the Punla Coffee Table. I'm going to do something a little different today. I would like to share with you a book. It's a review of a book titled The Chronicles of Adonai, The Colony. Now, let me explain to you what's going on. So part of my seminary classes require me to read and review some Christian books. And I've decided that this is a potential resource that at least some of you might be interested in. So I'm going to share my book review of each of the books as I go through my classes, and I'm going to summarize them for you. So let's start with a prayer. Heavenly Father, please guide our discussion today. Please help me to stay out of the way so that you can use me. And if I say anything wrong, please let the listener only remember the things you want them to remember, regardless of what I say. And we trust you, Lord. And I know you've promised us wisdom, so help us to look at this literature in a way that will assist our Christian life. And I pray these things in your name, Lord Jesus. Amen. Okay, the book is called The Chronicles of Adonai, The Colony. It's written by Dr. Braxton Hunter, who is currently the president of Trinity Seminary and Bible College in Indiana. Now, The Colony is the first of a three-part series titled The Chronicles of Adonai. And the three books are The Colony, which we're going to be talking about today, The Mountain, and The Island. And these are a fantasy fiction with an underlying Christian theme or worldview. Now, kind of abstract, to give you a quick overview, would be that The Chronicles of Adonai, the Colony, by Dr. Braxton Hunter, gives us a glimpse of what a society void of God might look like, the proverbial atheist utopia. In the story, this quickly dissolves or devolves into one central argument. Without God, how do you define good and bad? Now, the purpose of this book appears to be twofold. One, to provide an illustration of the consequences of our world views, whatever that worldview may be. And then two, it appeals to readers who are not traditionally going to read Christian literature. In providing a book review, I'll break my comments down into three sections. The first section, I'm going to review Dr. Hunter's central argument as it's told in the book. And this section will deal with just the content of the book itself. In the second section, I'm going to address the effectiveness of both the strengths and weaknesses that Dr. Hunter's approach that argument with. And in the final section, I'm going to share my personal perspective on this book, that and how I think it might be used effectively to reach the audience that Dr. Hunter was trying to reach. Now, I want everybody to know one thing before we get started. I am a reluctant reader at best because of my severe dyslexia. I have never read a book for pleasure in my life except for one, and that's the Bible. Therefore, my views on this book is as a non-reader and mildly antagonistic to reading as for pleasure. Yeah, it's just not my practice. Now, the story in the book begins by placing us in a post-apocalyptic setting of some sort. Some 18 years have passed since the Great Darkness that they call. And this is what has destroyed all the civilized world. Now only a remnant, the colony, live in a sort of atheist utopia. Now, the colony is located at an abandoned ski resort somewhere in the remote wilderness of British Columbia, Canada. And their creed is freedom to think, freedom to live, hope to seek, and hope to give. The story follows the son of the founding leader, or what they call an Adon. Sorry, it's not my terms. And the son's name is Justin. The first problem faced in the story is that someone has run away from the colony in what they call departure. Now, this is a grievous offense to them, and anyone that commits this departure has to be hunted down and returned to the colony for punishment. And over the course of the first half of the book, that fairy tale begins to unravel for Justin and his small group of friends, who are now asking some fundamental questions. How and why do I exist? And in one scene, there is one of the people that they're searching for, and that person mentions God. Just kind of, God bless you, Justin, as he's getting away from them. And this piques Justin's interest just a little bit. So his curiosity gets the best of him, and he goes to the library in the colony and begins to search for God, because he didn't know what that term even meant. And what he discovers is that every reference to God has been systematically and intentionally removed from all the resources in the library. And eventually, Justin and his friends discover a big secret, and that is anyone who tries to leave the colony or even disagrees with the Adonai is killed and buried on a mountain peak just outside the colony. Now, this revelation leads Justin to see God as the only plausible explanation for the questions that he's having. And a little later in the story, Justin learns that he has a sister living in Chicago. And by the way, billions of people are still living in the real world. Yes, the Great Darkness is a complete lie. And the colony is some sort of great social experiment gone completely wrong. The Adonai want to show that society without God is possible and better, but instead violence and immorality reigns in the colony. Freedom to think really means only as long as you think the way the leaders want you to think. And freedom to live really means only as long as you live the way that the leaders want you to live. And hope to seek really means no hope at all. And hope to give, well, it's only a lie, since the only thing that Adonai can give you is fear and pain. The story suddenly shifts to Chicago and the sister. Now, the story is from the sister, this Julie's perspective, until a few chapters later, when Julie has rediscovered the colony and reunited with her brother, Justin. The story comes to a climax as Justin and his friends expose this lie to the colony. And there's this big speech and some fallout from that, and then they escape back to the real world by helicopter. Now, the book ends a few weeks, or I think it's like 3 days later, when Julie and Justin return to the colony with law enforcement, only to find that everyone's gone without a trace. And then the final section of the book is a letter written from Justin to Julie. And in this letter, he tells her that he's now searching for the southern colony. There's another colony somewhere near Australia, and that's the end of the book. Now let's talk about strengths and weaknesses, okay? As I mentioned in my note at the beginning, I'm not a reader, but I can value this type of literature. Using a writing style that is entertaining in our culture opens the opportunity for a non-Christian to possibly read this book and be compelled by its arguments. Additionally, a young Christian who likes books like this will enjoy reading this story, and it may encourage them. Dr. Hunter makes a very good argument that society without God has no basis for moral behavior and won't have it. So as such, morals will be defined by the strongest and the most influential. As Dr. Hunter shows us, this will typically result in the leader's willingness to be violent in order to maintain that control. Now, I especially appreciate the motto that Justin assumes once he realizes that God is the truth, and that is, truth will triumph. God is the only source of truth, and without God, there is no truth, only opinion. Now, I did, however, feel like the book had some obvious weaknesses. First, the early encounters Justin has with God are good. But when the focus of these encounters turns toward the resurrection of Christ, it just seems like the author is pressing to try to make that connection. This is not natural in the story. Now, I understand the importance of the defense of the resurrection of Christ as a Christian, but it seems untimely in the story since that's not really the primary argument, and that's not really the question that most atheists are arguing against. It's usually the existence of God, not the resurrection. So atheists want to deny the very existence of God. So this idea that the resurrection proves the deity of Jesus, well, a very important argument, is not the primary to what the atheist is against. They're against God existing at all. The book begins really well with this fundamental question about why and how we're here. But then that deviation makes it a little confusing. And I think the flow of the book would have been better if the argument of the resurrection had been kept for later in the story. The story's climax speech, where Justin is talking to the colony and telling them the truth, focused a little too much on the resurrection of Christ, and nobody in that room would have had that as a primary question. If they had just focused on the existence of God, then you would have been talking to those that either didn't know about God or vehemently denied the existence of God, and that just would have made more sense, I think. I think the simpler would have been the more direct. Yes, focus on the existence of God rather than the resurrection of Jesus. So it just appears that they're answering a question that's not really being asked originally in the story, and that's my opinion. Additionally, the sudden change from the first-person perspectives of Justin in the colony to the first-person perspectives of Julie in Chicago, I found very confusing. In fact, I didn't get it at the beginning as I was reading. This was a very confusing approach. And in fact, throughout the next few chapters, it would drift back and forth from Julie's perspective to Justin's perspective and wasn't always completely clear who we were talking about. And I understand this is a common method, but I found it very distracting in the story, and I would have liked to have seen another approach. So let's talk practical applicability. Now, Dr. Hunter's book is not my personal genre, and as such, it's difficult for me to identify practical applicability. I do believe that more Christian writers should make attempts to produce literature in various genres. This is in an attempt to reach a broader audience, and the underlying message that you can see God in the world, even if you don't know the concept of God, was a really powerful message. I think it's very true. The story was very creative, with strong evidential support for the biblical worldview. The book provides some very intriguing side stories which could lead readers to look deeper in search of more information, which I think would be excellent. I would have liked it better, however, if somehow a copy of the Bible had been introduced into the story, or at least some scriptures. There's a chapel that shows up, and it could have been a conduit for that to be introduced into the story, and I think that would have been a really powerful way to transition the story. In conclusion, Dr. Hunter's book is well written for the genre that he's trying to attract. And a book like this is very good at pointing out the flaws in a society without God, that utopia that atheists always talk about or wish for. I think Dr. Hunter shows why we need a basis for our moral decisions, and more importantly, why a basis has to be based on God. There's no other standard that will work because only God is truth. I do believe that the younger generation would be interested in this book. And however, I would probably not recommend this book to a non-believer. I found that some of the situations very difficult to follow, and the theology being inserted at times was really hard to see the relevance in the story. So I would recommend it to a young believer, but I don't think this would work for a non-believer because it really makes the Christian theology a little confusing. So let's go ahead and pray. Father God, thank you so much for writers like Dr. Hunter and his attempts to reach the next generation. Help us to be discerning and look at literature like this in a way that you want us to use it, so that we can recommend to the right person at the right time to do your will. And I pray these things in your name, Lord Jesus. Amen. So, okay, the Chronicles of Adonai The Colony. I have to admit, I enjoyed reading this, even if there were some distractions and some misplaced theology statements. The concept was excellent. And I would probably like to hear the stories in the other two books of this series, but only if I could find them on audiobook, I'll be honest. So that's my review of the Chronicles of Adonai The Colony. And thank you for joining me today at the Punla Coffee Table, and I hope you'll join us again. If you like this message, please share it with a friend, and we will be reviewing some other books as I am encouraged as part of my work to review several books, and we'll be doing a couple more in the coming weeks. So until next time from the Punla Coffee Table, God bless.